Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. 3 weeks ago, I discovered a reality so shocking that it made me reconsider all I thought I understood about my life. I was working late to test a new home security system that I had just installed, which was an innovative piece of technology with high-definition camera and sound capabilities. I had spent days fine-tuning its settings, connecting it with my phone, and customizing its functionality. That evening, I finally had a chance to try out the live broadcast. The device was so advanced that it could detect even the tiniest noises with astonishing clarity, even quiet conversations in the background. I was curious to see how the software operated in real time. At first, all I could hear were the house's typical ambient sounds, the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet creak of the floorboards. But then I heard a voice say, "Sophia," from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone was calm and even casual, but something about it made me uncomfortable. I increased the volume and leaned closer to my phone. "She doesn't suspect a thing," Sophia replied, her voice full with amusement. My stomach churned. Was she speaking about me? I tried not to leap to conclusions, but her calm, confident tone made my pulse accelerate. Sophia's piercing, frigid laughter sliced through the muffled voice on the other end of the phone call. No, he's clueless," she said. "Mark's too wrapped up in his little gadgets to notice what's right in front of him." Her comment struck me like a blow in the stomach. I froze, my thoughts whirling. Was this a joke? I urgently wanted to think I had misunderstood and that there was an innocent explanation. But suddenly her tone changed, no more laughing, just a steely, intentional edge. "Okay, hold on, let me call you back," she responded hastily. A second later, I overheard her calling another phone. My heart hammered as I realized she hadn't finished. I adjusted the feed, scarcely breathing while listening closely. "Hi, thanks for calling me back," Sophia said, her voice crisp and professional. "Yes, I have made a choice. We'll proceed with the plan." My mind was racing, attempting to make sense of what I was hearing. The stillness on the other end of the telephone made her next comments even more terrifying. "Once we pin this on him," she spoke slowly and methodically, "I'll take the kids, the home, and everything else. He won't see it coming." I grabbed the phone so firmly that my palm hurt. Her voice was so smooth and measured. It seemed like she was negotiating a commercial transaction rather than scheming to destroy our whole lives. "No, it won't be an issue," she said nonchalantly. "Derek has already set everything up. All we need is for Mark to remain predictable, which he always does." Derek. The name hit me like a dagger. Derek's her colleague, the one I always assumed was harmless, the one I disregarded as a buddy. However, hearing Derek's name in this situation made my blood run cold. Sophia laughed briefly, almost amused, as if the exchange were a joke. "He'll never see it coming," she said, her voice full of confidence. I sat motionless at my company headquarters, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. This was not just betrayal. It was a cold, premeditated attempt to ruin me. Looking back, the indications were there, but I was either too blind or too trusting to see them. It was more than simply one thing. It was a sequence of little, unnerving incidents that I had ignored as minor blips in the path of a long marriage. But, in retrospect, they seemed like breadcrumbs pointing to a betrayal that had been simmering for months. Sophia had been spending lengthy periods of time in the backyard, pacing with her phone glued to her ear. She usually said she was meeting up with old pals, but the phone conversations seemed shady. Her laughing would drift through the air, light and carefree, yet I'd sometimes hear snippets of her speech. I once overheard her remark, "You're right, he's really oblivious." When I confronted her about it later, she smiled and dismissed it as just girl chat. I did not push the issue. Now I'm wondering whether all of those chats were part of something far bigger, something she'd been planning right under my nose. The dispute started soon after. They were modest at first, seemingly insignificant issues, such as where the vehicle keys were or why the groceries weren't properly stored. But they gradually increased, and her tone became harsher than I'd ever heard. One day, after one of her lengthy conversations, she came into the home, enraged that I hadn't taken out the garbage. It was 10 minutes beyond the normal time. After just 10 minutes, it had devolved into a full-fledged yelling storm, with her accusing me of being lazy and untrustworthy. At the time, I put it up to stress, but now I wonder if she was hunting for ways to depict me as the villain. It wasn't just her tone. It was the way she looked at me throughout our disputes. Her eyes were not filled with rage or irritation, they were calculating, as if she was recording every word I uttered, every emotion I had. Her outbursts had an almost scripted quality to them, as if she was attempting to provoke me, expecting I would say or do something she could then use against me. The emotional gap between us did not seem like an accident. It seemed deliberate, planned. I'd catch her glancing at me sometimes, a small grin on her lips, as if she knew something I didn't. Those times would pass fast and she'd be back to her usual self, joking with the kids or reading through her phone as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. I could feel it, even if I couldn't pinpoint precisely what it was. Then there were the tiny things that made no sense, like changing her phone's password for security reasons, insisting on managing all the bills alone when we'd always done it jointly, or canceling plans at the last minute because she was exhausted. At the time, I saw them as idiosyncrasies or indications that she needed some space. Now they seem like parts of a jigsaw I had no idea I needed to solve. In retrospect, everything seems obvious. Every disagreement, every whispered phone conversation, every frosty stare. It wasn't just a tough patch. She was meticulously constructing a case against me, brick by brick, while I remained unaware of the walls coming up around me. Everything came crumbling down for a reason other than a lost phone or a questionable SMS. It was more messier than that. It occurred in the midst of one of those heated debates that had become our new normal. This time, the focus was on the thermostat. She came into the kitchen, shrieking that I'd left it set too high, and I yelled back, wondering why everything seemed to irritate her recently. That's when it occurred. "Maybe if you listened for once, Derek, we wouldn't have to go through this," she said, her cheeks flushed with rage. Time stopped. The word lingered in the air like a bomb about to go off. Derek. Not Mark, baby, or hun, but Derek. Her eyes opened briefly before narrowing into a scowl, challenging me to confront her. My stomach churned, but I attempted to maintain a calm voice. "Did you just call me Derek?" I inquired, my tone calm and thoughtful. She sneered, rolling her eyes, and turned away. "Don't be ridiculous, Lucas," she remarked, her tone condescending. "You are overthinking again. You always do this. You're so paranoid." But the blunder had already struck deeper than I could have predicted. I glanced at her, looking for any signs of sorrow or remorse, but all I saw was cold, calculating hatred, as if this was somehow my responsibility. "Who the hell is Derek?" I yelled, my voice rising despite my best attempts to remain calm. She crossed her arms and stared at me as if I were the unreasonable one. "You're being insane," she yelled. "Derek is nobody. Just stop it." Her deflection simply deepened the hole in my gut. My mind raced, connecting connections I hadn't even realized existed until that point. Derek, the name she had just revealed, wasn't nobody. He was someone. He was the colleague she often laughed too hard with at corporate headquarters parties, and when I inquired about him months ago, she said he was just a buddy. I moved closer, my voice colder now. "Do not lie to me, Sophia. Is Derek responsible for all of this? The telephone calls? What about the fights? What are the secrets?" Her face contorted into a mask of indifference, a mocking smirk twisting across her lips. "You're unbelievable," she remarked, shaking her head as if I were the unreasonable one. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this." She grabbed her handbag and walked out, slamming the door. I stood there, my pulse racing and her words reverberating in my head. "You're paranoid, Derek is nobody," she said, but her slip had already revealed all. Derek was no ordinary person, he was the answer to all the questions I had never dared to ask before, and there was no going back. The want for answers gnawed at me like a disease I couldn't shake. I couldn't take her avoidance, facades, or vicious efforts to portray me as insane. So, one evening, when Sophia grabbed her keys and mentioned seeing a friend, I made a choice. I'd follow her. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my own keys and followed her vehicle from a safe distance. My hands were moist with perspiration as I drove through the streets, keeping my headlights dark and remaining far behind. I watched her drive into town, taking turns that took us away from our normal locations and into the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. The homes became bigger, the driveways longer, and the gates higher. She eventually paused at a spacious penthouse unit enclosed by tall hedges and a black iron gate. My chest constricted as I saw her come into the driveway. A few seconds later, the gate slid open and she went inside. I shut off the engine and parked down the street, barely out of sight. My heart beat so fast that it drowned out my thoughts. What was she doing here? Who did she know in a place like this? I approached closer on foot, trying to remain concealed in the shade of the groomed trees that lined the roadway. As I approached the property's edge, I glimpsed Sophia and Derek through the gate slats. They stood at the entry, surrounded by the warm warmth of the porch light. Sophia was laughing, her arm carelessly slung over his shoulder. Her body language was so familiar and personal that it made my stomach churn. Derek leaned in, his hand resting possessively on her waist, and said something that made her giggle even more. It was not the laughter she shared with me. It seemed lighter, more carefree, like if she was a different person when she was around him. I crouched behind a short hedge just outside the gate, straining to hear them. Their voices were hushed, but I heard snippets of their talk, which brought new waves of rage and uncertainty washing over me. "When this is over," Sophia replied, her voice dropping off into laughter. Derek responded quietly, but his tone was plainly serious. "We need to finish it quicker. I don't want to stretch this out." My thoughts raced. What exactly were they talking about? What needed to be done, and why was she laughing? I remained concealed, observing them like an intruder, spying on a life that no longer seemed mine. The life I believed I had with her was falling apart right in front of me, piece by piece. I wanted to rush through the fence and demand answers, confronting her with all I knew, or thought I knew, but I remained motionless, torn between rage and despair. I was terrified of what more I might discover if I got closer. After a few minutes, they entered. The door shut with a clatter behind them. I stood in the dark, my fists clenched, my thoughts racing. Whatever it was larger than I expected, and I wasn't sure what I'd discover next. Dinner began like any other. The sound of silverware clinking against plates and children discussing their day filled the room. I sat there, scarcely tasting my meal, my pulse hammering as I mentally rehearsed the words. The weight of what I'd seen and witnessed in Derek's penthouse apartment was too much for me to take alone. I needed to confront her, and I wanted her to face the reality. Not just in front of me, but also in front of the kids. Maybe if she saw their expressions, she'd feel a twinge of humiliation, a flash of remorse. "Sophia," I began, my voice calm but authoritative, breaking through the background hubbub. She looked up from her plate, and her fork halted in midair. The children stared at me, perplexed by my tone. "What?" she inquired, her look placid, but there was a flash of something in her eyes. "Weariness, maybe." "I know about Derek," I shouted, sounding like a thunderclap in the room. The children halted, their eyes flitting between us, confused expressions on their faces. Sophia's hand hesitated, her fork hesitating for a second before gently setting it down. "I apologize, what?" she inquired, her voice deceptively calm, her face a mask of feigned innocence. "Don't do that," I yelled, my rage rising to the surface. "Don't act stupid. I know what's been going on, the calls, meetings, and facades. I know everything." She sat back in her chair, crossed her arms, and her look became colder, more calculated. And then, to my surprise, she grinned. "You're pathetic, Lucas," she replied, her voice full of disgust. "Do you think anybody will trust you over me? You are delusional." The children glanced at her, their expressions filled with perplexity and terror. "Mom?" our daughter whispered, her voice trembling. Sophia didn't even look at her. Her eyes were riveted on me, tempting me to push harder. "This isn't just about me believing it, Sophia," I said. "It's about the truth, about what you've been doing behind my back while pretending everything's fine." She laughed. She laughed, as if I had told her the most absurd joke she had ever heard. "What is the truth?" she sneered. "Oh, please. You have been worried for months, always probing and suspicious. Perhaps if you spent more time being a good spouse and less time playing detective, I wouldn't need to seek elsewhere." Her words struck me like a slap, but what hurt the most was the expression in her eyes, disdain, as if I were beneath her. "I saw you with him, Sophia," I screamed, my voice quivering with rage and betrayal. At his house, laughing and talking about getting it done faster. What the heck were you planning? Tell me. She just rolled her eyes, her smile never faltering. You don't know what you're talking about, she told me, as if I were the stupid one. Even if you did, who would believe you? Me, the devoted wife and mother, or you, the unstable madman who has been stalking his own spouse? I looked at the youngsters. Their huge, horrified eyes were locked on both of us. My daughter was on the point of tears, while my son sat transfixed, grasping his fork as if it was the only thing keeping him in the present. That is enough, I yelled, throwing my fist into the table. The dishes shook, and the children flinched. But Sophia did not even blink. She leaned closer, her grin changing into something darker and more frightening. You're out of your depth, Lucas, she remarked gently, her tone tinged with venom. If you keep pushing, you will regret it. Trust me. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. And at that instant, I knew how far she had gone and how much danger I was in. That night, I sat alone in my study, looking at a family photograph on my desk. We were all smiling, myself, Sophia, and the kids, a picture-perfect family. But the reality had destroyed the fantasy. The lady I thought I knew, the life we created together, was all a lie. Her comments from dinner lingered in my head. You're pathetic, Lucas. The smile, the venom, the threat, it was all I needed to realize that talking with her was futile. She was not going to stop, and if she was determined to ruin me, I was not going to sit back and let her have it easy. I opened my laptop, my hands firm despite the maelstrom inside me. I entered into our bank accounts and looked at the balances, savings, checking, joint investments. It was all there, ready for the taking. I imagined how she'd chuckle if I let her get away with everything. She would undoubtedly rejoice with Derek once she had wiped me off. My jaw constricted. Not a chance. With a few clicks, I started the transfers, pouring every single penny into a new account I'd set in my name weeks before, when my suspicions began to grow. I did not hesitate. I did not second-guess myself. By the time I finished, the accounts were empty, the credit cards had been cancelled, and the auto payments for her gym, memberships, and shiny new automobile had been shut off. I just left enough money in the kids' college fund. None of this was their fault. But what about Sophie? Nothing. She had made it apparent that I was her target, and I was not going down without a fight. Before I left, I took a piece of paper and wrote a single statement on it. No lengthy explanations, no pleading with her to reconsider, just 7 words that expressed all I needed to say. You can't steal what's already gone. I put the letter on the kitchen counter, close to the coffee maker she used every morning, and then I left the home. There were no luggage packed, no tearful farewells, just the clothing on my back and the knowledge that I was finally in charge. As I drove away, I had an unusual sensation of tranquility. For the first time in months, I stopped responding to her games. I was taking action. While I had no clue what she would do when she found out, one thing was certain: the playing field had moved, and this time it was on my terms. The following day, I readied myself for the expected storm. Sophia was nasty, clever, and unrelenting, yet she was most predictable when cornered. Despite understanding her personality, I was unprepared for how far she would go. Around lunchtime, she burst into my company offices. I was in the midst of studying some reports when the door swung open and slammed against the wall. Heads peeked out of adjoining cubicles, and my colleagues craned their heads to see what was going on. And there she was, Sophia, well-clothed but with rage in her eyes. "Lucas!" she screamed, her voice echoing down the corridor. My supervisor, Mr. Anderson, had just come past and stopped in his tracks, turning to see what was going on. My blood raced cold, but I pushed myself to remain calm. "Sophia," I responded calmly, putting my papers down. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, this is just the location," she spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Everyone here needs to know what type of guy you really are." Whispers began to spread around the company offices as my colleagues exchanged anxious looks. A few others glanced at me quietly, wondering if they should interfere, but I shook my head. I was not giving her the gratification of seeing me lose control. "Sophia, let's go outside," I suggested, rising up in a measured tone, but she wouldn't have it. "Why?" So you may attempt to scare me, as you usually do, she yelled, before turning to face the audience with a theatrical sweep of her arm. Did you guys realize he had violent tendencies? Oh, I am sure he is nice at business, but at home he is a whole different person. The air within the business offices became strained. Mr. Anderson walked forward, his face wrinkled, while my colleagues exchanged uncomfortable and doubtful looks. Some mumbled among themselves, wondering how to respond. My expression remained neutral, but my hands clenched at my sides. That's enough, Sophia, I said firmly. You know that isn't true. Don't you dare. She snarled, her voice full of hatred. You've been gaslighting me for years, making me feel insane and undermining everything I do. And now, after all I've done for you, you empty the accounts and leave me with nothing. There it was. This was not about the alleged violence. This was her vengeance for denying her access to my hard-earned cash. Sophia, I continued, keeping eyes with her, my voice low but firm, you are embarrassing yourself. If you do not leave immediately, I will have no option but to contact security. Her face twisted into a scowl, but I saw a spark of uncertainty in her eyes. She wanted me to snap, to back up her crazy allegations in front of everyone, but I refused to bite. Mr. Anderson walked forward, his voice calm yet forceful. Mrs. Walker, he said, I recommend you leave. This is a professional company headquarters and we will not accept this kind of conduct. Her mouth clenched as she looked between me and Mr. Anderson. For a while, I thought she was going to take things further, but then she gave a bitter chuckle and shook her head. Do you think you've won, Lucas? She said, her voice frigid. This is far from over. With that, she swung around and marched out, her heels tapping fiercely on the tile floor. The room was quiet for a second before the rumble of voices reappeared. Mr. Anderson gave me a long, critical glance before nodding and walking away. I breathed softly, letting the adrenaline leave my body. My colleagues avoided eye contact, claiming to be focused on their job, but I could sense their uneasiness in the air. Sophia believed she could ruin me via lies and theatrics, but she didn't know I wasn't the same guy she had been manipulating for years. I had the facts and proof to defend myself, and I was not going to back down. Sophia has always been a master of looks. Her charm was captivating, her smile was beguiling, and she used both like weapons. So, when the impact from our disagreement at company headquarters wasn't enough to embarrass me, she used a different approach. She arranged a fundraiser, a large event to raise awareness for a local charity that she had previously only sometimes funded. However, anybody paying attention could see that the true goal was to restore her image and make me the community's villain. This time I was 2 steps ahead. Days before the incident, I had already planned my move. The tape of the phone conversation, during which she lay out her cold, planned strategy to frame me, was my trump card. I knew timing was crucial, so I waited while she sent out invites, chose the guest list, and methodically planned her speech. The night of the benefit came, and I observed from a distance as people flooded into the venue. It was a stunning show of extravagance, with glittering lights, exquisite table arrangements, and a sea of well-dressed guests. Sophia stood in the middle of it all, grinning as she welcomed her visitors. Her mask was securely in place, and I had a moment of amazement that she could continue like this after everything. When the audience became silent for her address, I knew it was time. I took out my phone, my thumb poised over the send button. The email was ready, sent to the whole fundraiser's guest list, and included a tape of Sophia's call to her lawyer, along with a transcript of her incriminating words. Once we pin this on him, I'm taking the kids, the house, and everything else. He won't see it coming. I hit send from where I stood, just out of sight of the action, and watched the ripple effect begin. Guest phones vibrated and pinged in tandem, piercing through the polite applause as Sophia began her address. At first, it was subtle, people taking out their phones, gazing down, and furrowing their brows while reading. Then came the murmurs. They spread like wildfire, becoming more louder, until a buzz of whispers filled the room. Sophia faltered in the middle of her sentence. Her gaze flashed across the room. She saw the change, the stolen glances, the disapproving eyes, and the horrified looks. What is going on? She inquired, her voice betraying its stuttered calm. No one responded to her. Instead, whispers became loud fragments. Have you heard what she said? Could you believe it? What kind of person does that? Her composure broke. Excuse me. she yelled, her voice loud as she attempted to recover control. Unfortunately, it was too late. Her carefully built identity, which she had spent years crafting, was disintegrating before her own eyes. Someone in the audience spoke up, a local entrepreneur who had always supported Sophia's charity programs. She lifted her phone, her look chilly and disapproving. "Can you explain this, Sophia?" she inquired, her voice piercing across the room. Sophia's face had lost its color. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her confidence dwindling with each syllable. "Oh, really?" the woman responded, shaking her phone. "Because this recording makes it pretty clear who you are, and it's not the person you've been pretending to be." The room burst in turmoil. The rumors developed into outright clashes as attendees questioned Sophia's honesty and motivations. Her cries were unheard since the cacophony drowned out her voice completely. She glanced around, anxious for an ally, but there was none. I turned to walk away, the sounds of her unraveling ringing behind me. For the first time in months, I felt in control. She had misjudged me, and now she was reaping the consequences of her lies and treachery. The reaction was fast and harsh. By the following day, Sophia's name had become well known, but not in the manner she had planned. The tape spread like wildfire, being sent and shared by the town's most powerful leaders. I made certain of it. Everyone who mattered, her charity circles, her social groups, and even her parents, got a copy of the tape. Nobody could claim ignorance of Sophia's true identity anymore. Derek, her alleged buddy, was the first to abandon ship. I heard via the grapevine that he had gone radio quiet, not responding her calls or text messages. The Golden Boy, a colleague who had been anxious to move things ahead, now wanted nothing to do with her. I was not surprised. Derek valued self-preservation above all else, and connecting himself with a sinking ship like Sophia would only pull him down. Sophia, on the other hand, did not go peacefully. She sought to save what little she could of her image by phoning friends and supporters and telling tale after story about how the tape was taken out of context or entirely manufactured. But the proof was irrefutable, and the people no longer believed her falsehoods. Her friends, many of whom had been captivated by her charm for years, stopped returning her calls. Her name became poisonous, whispered about at brunches and cocktail parties, and uttered with sidelong looks. Even her parents, who had always adored her, declined to protect her this time. According to what I've heard, they were furious not only because of the scandal, but because they, too, had bought into the image she had painstakingly crafted. The humiliation struck her most when she attempted to attend one of her usual haunts, a high-end club where she used to entertain her circle of admirers. The once friendly staff avoided eye contact, and the typical grins from acquaintances devolved into uncomfortable nods or outright rejections. Sophia, despite her arrogance, was obviously rattled as her meticulously maintained world crumbled around her. Meanwhile, I remained in the background, watching her facades crumble. I did not gloat. It was not satisfying to witness someone you once loved self-destruct. But there was a sad feeling of justice in knowing that the truth had been revealed and that her web of deception could no longer trap anybody else. By the end of the week, Sophia's calls to the children's school to complain about me had been ignored, and her efforts to assemble legal backing for a case against me had been laughed at. Every component of her strategy had crumbled, leaving her vulnerable, alone, and just where she had intended to leave me, with nothing. Sophia waltzed into the courtroom as if she were entering a stage. She had her crocodile tears ready, was dressed in subdued hues that screamed victim, and told her story with the ease of someone who has memorized every word. She depicted me as an inadequate spouse, a domineering monster who had depleted her savings and abandoned her. For a second, I worried whether the judge would fall for her ruse. Sophia was a superb manipulator. But when it was my time, I didn't need theatrics. I had the truth on my side. My lawyer presented the evidence, a tape of her phone conversation conspiring to frame me, financial documents revealing how she had diverted money for personal indulgences while ignoring our home obligations, and her outright falsehoods about my alleged aggressive tendencies. We also presented evidence from numerous of her former acquaintances and co-workers who had distanced themselves after learning the truth. One by one, their comments built a picture of a lady who was cunning, manipulative, and completely untrustworthy. Sophia's confident demeanor began to shatter as the evidence gathered. When the tape was played in court, her face became pale. The judge leaned forward, listening closely as her own damning words filled the room. "If we can put this on him, I'll take the kids, the home, and everything else. He won't see it coming." When the audio ended, there was deafening quiet in the judgment room. Sophia struggled to recover, arguing that the tape was out of context and that she had only said such words out of fury. Unfortunately, it was too late. Her desperation was obvious, and her arguments collapsed under the weight of the facts. The judge, a no-nonsense guy with little tolerance for deception, did not mince words. "Mrs. Walker," he said sharply, "your actions, as chronicled here, show a clear pattern of manipulation and bad faith. This court cannot, in good faith, leave the children in your custody." Sophia gasped, shaking as she grasped the table's edge. "Your Honor, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'm their mother." The judge stopped her, his voice firm. "As a mother, your actions should be in their best interests, not your own selfish agenda. Mr. Walker has been given custody. Furthermore, based on the financial data submitted, your alimony request is refused." I sat there, the weight of months of struggle lifted as the judge's gavel fell. Sophia's expression contorted with shock and wrath. Her lips opened and closed, looking for words to scream out, but none came. She was aware that she had run out of moves. As we exited the courtroom, she came up to me in the corridor, her voice low and angry. "You'll regret this, Lucas," she said, her gaze tightening. I turned to her, calm and determined. "No, Sophia. The only regret I have is that I did not see through you sooner." She did not react. She just stood there watching as I went away. The kids were waiting for me just outside the doors. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. The struggle was ended and I had triumphed. Not out of spite, but because it was the best decision for myself and our children. Sophia wasn't done even after she lost in court. She was like a trapped animal, frantic and scary. I should have known she'd attempt something dramatic, but I had no idea how low she'd go. A few weeks following the custody decision, a police corporate headquarters representative arrived at my home. My stomach sunk as he gave me the notice. Sophia had filed a complaint stating that I had abused her. According to her allegation, I brutally assaulted her few days following the court verdict. She also gave photographs of injuries on her arms and face as proof. At first, I had a flash of terror. Her fossils had previously worked on a large number of individuals. What if this time they got stuck? But when I sat with my lawyer, going over the report and the so-called facts, my worry turned to rage. This wasn't simply another faucet, it was a deliberate effort to ruin my life altogether. Sophia had made one critical error, however. She had misjudged the amount of credibility she had already lost as a result of the court, the recordings, her unsuccessful fundraiser, and the innumerable people who had seen her for who she really was. Her words had little weight now. When the inquiry started, things crumbled quicker than she could have anticipated. Sophia's injuries in the images were not consistent with her statement. Medical personnel who examined the photographs instantly discovered traces of makeup rather than actual injuries. The cops also wanted timestamps and information for the images, which Sophia conveniently couldn't offer. Then came the ultimate blow. CCTV video from a neighborhood cafe on the day of the claimed event showed Sophia smiling and conversing with friends while unhurt. The clip was released online and rapidly went viral, with the public reacting harshly. She became the target of criticism and contempt, with her name trending on social media with memes and hashtags calling her out for lying. When the police rejected the case owing to a lack of evidence, they did not end there. Sophia was informed that making a false report was a criminal violation. Although no charges were brought, the harm to her already tarnished image was irrevocable. Word circulated rapidly that even her last allies, those who had stayed with her out of loyalty or ignorance, had finally turned against her. Her name became associated with deception, a joke in every discourse in town. As for me, I refused to let her ultimate plan influence me. I had my children, my peace of mind, and the truth at my side. Sophia's frantic games just confirmed what I already knew. I was free of her influence, while she was forced to face the repercussions of her actions. Now, some months later, when the dust has cleared, I can't help but think about all that has transpired. This has been without a doubt the most difficult year of my life. I lost my family, the lady I thought I knew, and the future I thought we were creating together. But, despite all of the lies, betrayals, and conspiracies, I discovered something I hadn't realized I had, me. If there is one thing I've learnt, it's the value of following your intuition. Those nagging suspicions, those subtle indicators that something is wrong, are there for a purpose. For months, I disregarded mine, certain that the fissures in our marriage were the result of stress or normal conflicts. But I sensed there was something wrong. Looking back, I wish I'd listened sooner. But I am happy that I listened when I did. Standing my ground was another difficult but rewarding lesson. There were times when I wanted to give up, when I considered letting her lies and manipulation triumph so that I could avoid the ongoing conflicts. But as I looked at my children, I realized I couldn't. They deserved the truth. They deserved a future free of the upheaval she brought into our lives, as did I. Now I'm focused on going ahead. The kids and I are settling into a new routine that is solid and tranquil, in stark contrast to the upheaval we had before. We are laughing more, talking more freely, and I can sense the weight lifting off their shoulders. They are beginning to feel protected again, which makes every argument, restless night, and conflict worthwhile. If there is one thing I hope everyone who reads this understands, it is that there is always a path ahead. It will not be easy. It will hurt, and you will doubt yourself several times. But the truth has a way of breaking through the facades and illuminating the way forward. Even when all seems lost, I hope my experience serves as a caution and a lesson to trust your instincts, remain strong, and never let others determine your value or destiny. The agony does not remain indefinitely, but the lessons you learn will. Now, when I look forward, I am no longer terrified. The worst is behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I believe the best is still ahead. Months passed and the profound wounds Sophia had created started to heal. It didn't happen overnight, the anguish persisted, but with each passing day, I felt myself becoming stronger. I could also observe the transformation in the kids. They were no longer concerned about what Sophia might say or do next. They started to laugh again and felt secure again. For the first time in years, our home had the tranquility I hadn't known we were lacking. It was not simple, of course. There were days when I felt the full weight of all that had happened, the lies, betrayals, and manipulation. There were times when I wanted to shout in fury at how long it took me to recognize Sophia for who she truly was. But then I'd recall why I fought so hard, why I held firm and refused to let her ruin me. I had the children now, but more importantly, I had myself. I'd discovered my voice and power. And with it came the clarity I had been seeking for so long. I pushed myself into work, focused on my profession, and doing things I had previously loved. I rediscovered activities that I had put aside for years. I began rebuilding my life piece by piece. Surprisingly, I started to relish the brief moments of serenity which I had nearly forgotten how to appreciate. The more I concentrated on my own health, I understood how much Sophia had taken me for granted. She had imagined that she could influence me indefinitely, controlling every element of our lives. But she'd underestimated me, which was her worst error. She believed she could break me, but she ended up making me stronger. Meanwhile, Sophia's life was unraveling. The recording caused permanent harm, which spread rapidly. People inside the community began to distance themselves from her. She used to be the center of attention at every party, a lovely lady who made everyone feel special. But suddenly she was the focus of whispered whispers, sideways stares, and derision. Even her so-called friends had abandoned her. The community knew the kind of person she had become, and no amount of spin could alter that. Her efforts to preserve the image of the ideal mother and wife were received with scorn. Sophia attempted to fight her way back into the good graces of those she had previously captivated, but it was too late. The truth was out, and no amount of trickery could undo the harm. I couldn't say I felt sorry for her. I nearly wanted to. She had been the mother of my children, after all. But when I reflected on the years of lies and manipulation, I understood that she had created her bed and now had to lay in it. I was no longer responsible for her conduct. The custody agreement stayed in place, and I had the children full-time. Sophia had attempted to resist it, of course. She had made repeated efforts to persuade the court to rethink and amend the custody arrangement in her favor, but each time, the judge saw straight through her. Her efforts to play the victim went hollow, leaving her with nothing. I ensured the kids got the stability they needed. I got them engaged in activities, made sure they had friends, and let them know they were sincerely loved by both of us. They had the opportunity to be children again, free of the poisonous atmosphere Sophia had created. They were no longer terrified or unclear about their future. Sophia's visits to the children gradually decreased. She would come up, make promises she never fulfilled, and then leave for many weeks. I'd informed the kids that they shouldn't expect anything from her anymore. She had betrayed their confidence, just as she had shattered mine. It was painful for them, but at least they were protected in a family where they felt cherished. But Sophia never really gave up. She would periodically attempt to contact out, sending text messages or emails offering reconciliation or claiming change. She would sometimes call, but I never responded. It wasn't because I didn't want to or was furious. I just moved on. I'd realized that in order to completely recover, I needed to break all links with the harmful components of my past. I couldn't let her drag me back into her games. I wasn't the same guy as before. I felt stronger, clearer, and more motivated than ever. One day, I got a letter in the mail. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but when I read the return address, I realized it was from Sophia. I nearly did not open it, but something compelled me to do so. I tore open the envelope, and as I read the message, my chest tightened. It was an apology of sorts. She apologized for the anguish she had caused, the Fossards, and the devastation of our family. She accepted her shortcomings, but something about the letter seemed odd. It was not a real apology. It was another effort to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. She was pleading with me to accept her back into my life, to forgive her and begin again. I read the letter once, crumpled it up, and threw it away. I was not going to fall for it again. I'd gone too far to let her back into my life. I was finished with the Fossards. I was finished with the games. As far as I could, I kept the kids out of her manipulating grasp. They were still too little to grasp the seriousness of what had occurred, but they were getting there. They started asking questions and I answered them honestly. I made sure kids understood that no matter what Sophia did or said, they were loved and cared for. That was the most crucial aspect. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I questioned whether I'd made the right decision by separating them from their mother. But deep inside, I knew that was the only option. I was not going to allow children to grow up in the same poisonous atmosphere that I had. They deserved better. Months stretched into a year and a half, and the tumult of the past gradually faded. Life, however bizarre it sounded, started to seem normal again. The incessant uneasiness, nagging uncertainty, and dread of the next encounter were all gone. The children and I were finding our groove, and I could finally breathe. One evening, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I responded anyway. "Hello," I said, my voice calm. "Lucas." I froze. It was Sophia. I wasn't sure what to anticipate. Will she attempt to manipulate me again? Will she arrive with more lies and apologies? I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry for everything," she murmured, her voice soft and almost frightened. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I just needed you to hear me say it." I said nothing. I was not furious. I was not bitter. I just moved on. I'd discovered serenity. "I don't need anything from you," she said, her voice cracking. I simply wanted you to know that I'm striving to improve. For the children." I listened, but I was unsure if I believed her. Half of me wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the other half knew I couldn't afford to lose my guard again. I did not say anything for a long time. I let the stillness to stretch between us. I finally spoke. "Sophia," I murmured, keeping my voice cool. "I am not sure whether you will ever be the person you claim to be today. But I have moved on. The kids and I are doing well. We are reconstructing our lives. I am not going to drag myself back into the turmoil you have created. I hope you get the calm you are yearning for. But that is it. I'm finished." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease. Thank you for viewing this moving movie of betrayal, resilience, and redemption. How would you have handled this situation? Would you have tackled the facts immediately away or attempted to make peace first? Please share your ideas in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to get more inspirational tales. Until next time.